the U.S. vetoed the resolution and the UK abstained because, and I need to be blunt with your listeners, uh, because they are enabling what is now an open-ended Israeli war, which is against Hamas, but against Gaza civilians.
Now, for our top story today, the US was the only country to veto the UN Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza last night. Deputy US Ambassador to the UN, Robert Wood, said a ceasefire would only allow Hamas to regroup. World leaders, international rights groups, and UN officials have roundly criticised the US for its decision. And just this afternoon, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said that the veto has made the US complicit in war crimes in Gaza. Joining me now is Scott Lucas, Professor of American Studies and a specialist in US and British foreign policy. Scott, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's great to be here.
Scott, let's look at what happened yesterday. The 15 members of the Security Council, we had a veto from the United States and an abstention from the United Kingdom, saying that they abstained because the what was voted on wasn't criticising Hamas enough. It wasn't condemning Hamas. Do we understand exactly why the US vetoed yesterday's resolution?
Well, the U.S. vetoed the resolution and the UK abstained because, and I need to be blunt with your listeners, because they are enabling what is now an open-ended Israeli war, which is against Hamas, but against Gaza civilians. The official explanation that the resolution didn't specifically mention Hamas ignored the fact that the United Nations, including the Secretary General, have come out strongly in terms of criticizing Hamas's actions that started this cycle of violence on October 7th. They have criticized the mass killings of Israeli citizens and foreign nationals. They have criticized Hamas taking more than 250 hostages at that point. In other words, this is not the case that the UN has given Hamas a pass on what is happening. The reality is that after the 7-day humanitarian pause that we had earlier this month, the Israeli War Cabinet decided on a phase two, which was not only to carry out its ground offensive in northern Gaza, but all the way across southern Gaza, including the bombing to support that ground offensive, and that they are going to do so, and this is the words of Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, to destroy Hamas. A ceasefire would stop them from trying to destroy Hamas. That's the central point here, and the U.S. and the U.K. by their actions in the Security Council are at the least allowing Israel to go ahead and proceed with these operations without any check from outside for the foreseeable future.
In a sense, though, Scott, has that not been agreed from the very beginning, if you like, from the initial and continuing support for Israel, that their main aim in the ground offensive in Gaza was to disable Hamas, to prevent Hamas from ever being capable of launching an attack similar to October the 7th? And as far as the Israeli Defense Force is concerned, they still have work on the ground to do. So is there the logic there that, well, if you call for a ceasefire now, then the job's not done, which means that Israel's leaving itself open for another attack by Hamas, similar to what we saw on October the 7th?
Well, but there was an important difference, Alexis, between what Israel might have wanted to do and its relations with the international community in phase one of this war, all the way up until Israel resumed operations 8 days ago. And during that first phase, from October 7th until effectively the end of November, the international community, including the United States, including the UK, albeit behind closed doors, almost every European state, the Australians, the Canadians, the Japanese, and of course, Middle Eastern states were telling the Israelis, look, we understand that Hamas has crossed a line with the mass killing. We understand that Hamas is not a legitimate authority to govern Gaza. We have to discuss what to do about it. But at the same time, they were telling the Israelis, again, often behind closed doors, you will not be able to, quote, do this, destroy Hamas by just military means. Indeed, what you will do is you'll actually drive civilians in Gaza into the arms of Hamas
Mm.
as their only protector. If you do this with military means, instead, what you need to do is to isolate Hamas politically, economically, and through security measures. You need to play this a bit longer than trying to crush them in the next few weeks. And they did delay the Israeli ground offensive for several weeks by doing that. But again, there just came a breaking point uh, just over a week ago where the Israeli War Cabinet, these three individuals, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, the former head of the military Benny Gantz, they had to make the decision as to whether they were going to step back and allow humanitarian aid to go into Gaza, where they might occupy the northern part of Gaza, but that the rest of the Gaza Strip would be secure at that point or safe from Israeli attacks, or they had to go all out. And when they made their decision to to go all out, to quote, destroy Hamas, to borrow a phrase from UK politics, they said to the Americans and to an extent to the British, back us or sack us.
Mhm.
In other words, dare to oppose us in the Security Council or accept that we're doing this. And in effect, the US and the UK, well, they decided not to sack the Israelis over this. And indeed, the US has gone farther because, as I can explain if you wish, they're providing the bombs and the shells that Israel is using to attack not only Hamas, but also to kill Gaza civilians on a daily basis.
Scott, just because we are pressed for time, just one final question, if I may. How has the decision of the US to veto yesterday's resolution gone down in the US? Because not so long ago, we saw Congress block money going to Israel and to Ukraine, we should say, as well. But how has yesterday's veto gone down in US politics?
The Republicans, the hardline Republicans blocking aid to Israel is not because of the Gaza war. It's because they're blackmailing Biden over immigration. There's a division in America, and that is that a lot of the American public is very uncomfortable or, in fact, opposes the ongoing Israeli attacks in Gaza. But at the elite level amongst governing officials, amongst much of the American media, you still have this drumbeat on a day to day basis that is all about Hamas. It's only about Hamas. It's not about, the fact that there have been mass killings on both sides. And indeed, the bigger issue this week in a lot of the American press was not what was going to happen at the UN Security Council, but has been a headline scuffle over whether university presidents are doing enough to condemn anti Semitism. So, no, I don't see a shift in the US position, even if a lot of Americans are very uncomfortable with what's happening right now.
Okay. Scott, as always, very good to speak to you. Thank you. Scott Lucas, Professor of American Studies and a specialist in US and British foreign policy.